All right. Hi, everyone, and everyone who is tuning in this recorded version. So most of you all know who I am, but I will introduce myself, I suppose. So I'm Carly. I'm an alto. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm really excited because we're here to talk about web and media accessibility and be in community to just be thinking and putting ourselves in the mind space of how we can use different tools and practices and just ways of moving and being in digital space that is inclusive of as many human beings as humanly possible. um, and so I'm excited. We're going to be diving into a ton of different topics, some in some really kind of sweet detail, be practicing some stuff. And other topics I'm going to introduce and we're going to talk about a little bit, but then I have a ton of tools and resources to dig into in your own time whenever you would like to. And of course, as a just disclaimer at the very beginning, to always feel free to reach out to myself or any others of us in our community that have resources to share in this space. And, we can make this really collaborative and just be sharing resources moving forward after today. Okay, so I've already done welcome. Hello. So to kind of introduce the mindset that we're going to be bringing into today is a small, a quote. Feel free to disregard social etiquette in the name of access. This speaks to so many things, one of which is just the role that accessibility tends to play, especially in digital spaces. The fact that oftentimes it's seen as an afterthought, as something that we're going to add on when we have the time, when necessary, when someone pushes us to do so, when we get called out, or when there's a legal backing to support this reason, in order to push us to act and to be more inclusive. And really, yeah, to embody this I guess, way of moving through digital spaces that we can just disregard any of that normative social etiquette to advocate for access for ourselves, for others, for those around us, whenever humanly possible, especially throughout the entire process. And a personal statement for myself, and to talk a little bit about where my experience in accessibility work comes from, is that I do hold a lot of privilege within digital spaces. As someone who I don't currently regularly require accessibility tools in order to navigate digital spaces comfortably. My experience in accessibility work comes from my work. So some of you know that more recently, I've been training as a software engineer with the goal of becoming an accessibility engineer specifically. And where this comes from is that prior to that, one of my jobs was working in digitization and media librarianship at UC Berkeley. And there I was doing a lot of digital accessibility work. I was creating and attuning screen reader files. I was creating audio transcriptions, captioning video files that I was creating for our streaming platform at UC Berkeley, and working with users to make sure that any of the things that we were digitizing had as many options to access that material as possible in different workflows and in different mediums. As part of this, I attended a lot of digital media accessibility workshops. I used all of my workforce development money specifically for accessibility because it was such a big interest and passion of mine. And then, more recently as an engineer, I've been learning about navigating the web using a screen reader, doing accessibility testing, studying the WCAG guidelines for web accessibility, etc. So I'll share a little bit of that with you as well, just because I went through that process with our website recently. But a lot of my really deep experience does come more in media librarianship and media accessibility tooling and social media accessibility tooling, which will be a very relevant one, I think, for most of us who are on social media all the time. Some things for us to reflect on and just kind of get into this space together are, I have just a couple questions for us to think about, maybe reflect on for a few minutes, and then share out to each other if we feel comfortable or if we would like, both in the chat, or if you would like to share out in the open. I can read out some things from the chat if you put it there as well. But some questions are just to place yourself, ground yourself, and thinking about what experiences do I have utilizing accessibility tools when navigating the web or in consuming media. Some things that you might use daily, you don't actually think about as accessibility tools or deriving from accessibility tooling workflows specifically, but I do promise that we use accessibility tools every single day, all of us. And connected to that, what accessibility tools are you aware of? And thinking about what are any kind of assumptions that we have regarding accessibility. Who is accessibility for? So we can take a few minutes to think about this, reflect on this. And if anyone has some thoughts in the chat, we can include that there, or we can come back together and talk a little bit before we move into talking more about accessibility specifically. Awesome. Some things I'm seeing in the chat for those who are tuning in later is that we have subtitles and screen reader, pointer and mouse magnifier. Amazing. Some tools that Trish has used with students to promote their access in academic work include Google Read and Write and Orbit Note. Paula is interested and curious to hear what Orbit Note is. I would also love to hear about it. I think it's like an OCR kind of software, correct? Like a screen reader processor or preparer.
I don't know what OCR is, but yes, what you described is what it does. Yeah, but I can go into it in discussion later.
Awesome. Yeah. And yes, so same as Paula for Phoebe, talk to text and dictation, screen brightening and darkening. Yes, very important. Auto transcription, which is ideally getting better and better as time goes on, and CC closed captions. Awesome. Yeah, we're identifying a lot of really key core accessibility tools here. Does anyone have any other things they'd want to share? Why am I on this screen? Regarding these questions or the reflection that we've been doing, or if you want to share more about Orbit Note, Trish, that'd be awesome.
So this is an example of addition, and so what I'm going to use, this is Orbit Note. I uploaded a PDF, and what you can do is have a student or anyone, if they want to work with and give their answer to this. So like one way of doing this would be you can type it, or you can use voice chat. 9. I just say 9. Oh, so you can either use your voice to put it in, or you can just type 9, and then you can read it back to yourself.
Nice.
There seems to be some updating that it needs to do, but what's nice about this in an academic setting is that because many teachers use PDFs, and they don't know how to make that more accessible, this tool allows students to interact with the prepared work that they can either by typing or voice typing. And so Orbit Note works beautifully with Google Read and Write, and Google Read and Write also has similar functions. But what's nice is that Orbit Note makes it easier for the people who don't have accessibility problems, make it accessible for those who need it. So like you said, it does seem like a bit of a response to need rather than starting from the get-go of how can we make academic work accessible to others. So that was just quick and dirty or Orbit Note.
Amazing. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I think seeing those tools in action does also give you a lot, as you said, that kind of like perspective, like, oh, this is helpful across the, like these are just very helpful features for a vast majority of students, to be fair, just to give options, right? Giving folks choice is really the best tool that we can give, because everyone knows exactly like how they're going to like learn and access information best. And like, you know, accessibility tools tend to be added in to provide more choice afterwards, rather than thinking of things as like giving wealth of choice from the beginning and viewing like access in that way, just in general. But yeah, that's awesome. PDFs are notoriously difficult and inaccessible. So the more tools that we have to break those down and just provide more options of how to access PDF content is really cool. Awesome. Any other things that folks want to share around this reflection, or this is also great just to have for yourself. You're coming into this with with what are my assumptions? What kind of experience do I have? And then we can do we will do a similar reflection at the end to just kind of think about what has shifted, or what things we might have learned or new tools we're aware of now. But anyone want to share anything before we get started in the content?
This is something that has just been increasingly on my mind over the past like 10 years or so. And I feel like there's so many people who are put into a position in paid labor, unpaid labor, where they're responsible for messaging that's going out to be consumed on the web, and are just really woefully underprepared to think beyond their own one small experience and not given a lot of support or resource. And so I'm really excited that there's like folks like you who are going into programs to really elevate the way that engineering is happening, and also that there's community action that we can take to try and give each other knowledge and support. And so just feeling really grateful for this offering. And I know that there's a lot that I've like come across and haven't retained. And so I'm excited to have like a go-to place for referencing things when I need reminding, and hopeful that there's some resources within here where we can go online, or like just access this recording or message you or something. So excited for some of that as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think especially right there are some things that are kind of gate kept in terms of accessibility. I think of this in engineering, where the more I'm learning about accessibility engineering, the more surprised I am of like, oh my gosh, I never learned this in boot camp. You know, like they're not preparing engineers to know anything about these more complex topics in accessibility. It's seen as this very niche skill set, you know, that you have to really go out of your way to train yourself, you know, learn and train yourself in. And yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot as well in that field. And similarly with, you know, social media, where we have all the tools, you know, like it's there, it's built into the software already, but there's not a lot of space to practice or to really like think about how to incorporate it into the workflow of social media as a just like process. And so, yeah, that's what I'm excited to get into today, is a little bit of just that, feeling a little more comfy with knowing what the workflow might look like and how to incorporate it into these types of, yeah, when we're producing media. If you're someone who produces media all the time, which everyone does, especially in social media for the most part, we're all kind of making posts and even small little posts every day. Okay, any other thoughts before? I appreciate that, Phoebe. Awesome. Okay, on we go. Here is our plan, which is going to be a little bit flexible, because we'll see the pace at which we go. I have a lot of information, again, that I said that I'm going to be sharing, which can be shared in a lot of different modalities. So, you know, we'll see what the pacing is as we go along. But there's just a few things that I'm going to be covering, or we are going to be working with tonight. First is, you know, I do want to share some statistics and just some, I mean, I don't have to say this to any of us here in this room or anyone who would be watching this and having to argue why accessibility is important, but giving some background into this work and why it is, you know, really yeah, it needs so many advocates. And then we're going to be moving into 3 different sections of thinking about digital space and accessibility. The first of which is going to be social media accessibility. We'll practice writing alt text and image descriptions, thinking about how those 2 things work together in social media. And then video accessibility and media accessibility is going to be pretty, that and social media really go hand in hand, because social media also has video content and stories and all of these different things that accessibility tools and in terms of our position, the things that we'll be producing for accessibility tooling are going to be pretty similar in social media and in video. But I know that we also produce some video content for YouTube, for instance. So thinking about how to use captioning workflows and transcriptions for video content. If we ever do interviews that are audio interviews or make a video profile talking about our work and stuff, this is going to be really helpful for us to be able to easily produce captions and transcriptions. So I'll talk a little bit about the good practices for those 2 things as well. And then lastly, I'll get into a little bit of web accessibility. I'm not going to go super deep into this, but I will use our website kind of just as a guide. We'll navigate it using a screen reader so that you can just see what that feels like and looks like and, well, listens like as we navigate our website. And then I'll go into just a few things of like what to look out for in websites and things, if we happen to be building them, or even just using, you know, WordPress or any kind of tools to build websites, just to make, you know, sure that the content we're putting in there is also going to be accessible, the colors we pick, all of these things. Awesome. And we will practice. We'll get some opportunities to write together and to share, discuss what, you know, good practice looks like. Okay, accessibility is important. So we've kind of we've introduced this in our reflection, thinking about how accessibility extends and impacts really everyone. But it is also very important to address how significant this is for a great deal of the population who really desperately need the choice and the access to these media accessibility workflows and tools in order to comfortably and easily move through digital spaces. And talking with folks who are decision makers in digital spaces, you honestly would think that the population of, those who require these kinds of accessibility tools is negligible, is like a tiny minority. But that is very much not true. These statistics we see on the left will give an even kind of just a broader kind of idea of just the vast amounts of folks that these tools impact. Thinking about visual disability and hearing disability, which is often the disabilities that are seen and addressed the most readily in terms of thinking about accessibility. It's what more decision makers are going to want to focus on. But yeah, 3.8 million adults having a visual disability within the United States and 466 million worldwide having a hearing disability is a huge percentage. Over 1 billion people in the world having a disability that impacts their navigation of digital space, which, when we think about it in terms of population size, more than the population of the United States, Canada, France, Italy, Japan, Mexico, and Brazil combined are being impacted by this fact that 98% of the world's top 1 million websites don't offer full accessibility. And so that is a huge percentage of work that needs to be done for a huge percentage of folks who are accessing digital spaces. And we also can broaden and should, broaden our ideas of what accessibility tools and what kinds of needs need to be addressed when we're thinking about accessibility, beyond just visual and hearing disabilities and access. Thinking about cognitive disability and learning disabilities and how those impact our navigation of digital spaces, things like internet and bandwidth access. So the fact that a vast majority of the folks using it with, navigating digital space around the world don't have access to the types of bandwidth or the internet access that we as very privileged humans in the United States, and especially those living on, in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, have when we think about, how easeful it is to move through digital space. We can also think of motor impairment and just any kind of temporary disabilities. If you have a broken arm, if you are trying to be on a call on the internet while you're holding your baby, right? There's so many ways in which accessibility tooling would then come into play as a choice for folks to be able to use. And everyone benefits. I mean, not to be incredibly, just like, oh, everyone benefits from these tools, but captions, for instance, were something that didn't exist before accessibility tooling came in with film and media, right? But now, if you're in a busy bar, right, and you're watching the election or something, right, and captions are the only way that we're able to tell what is going on, for instance. Any of these kinds of moments where everyone benefits from these tools. I also should keep a look. 1 in 7 to 8 people in the world has a disability. Yes, because the current world population, 7.89 billion. Yes, it's an incredible, right? And curb cut. Yeah, Phoebe, that's fantastic. Right. So curb cut effect, curb cuts being integrated for accessibility purposes. And now so many people benefit. Folks with strollers trying to move through the city space, anyone, with bikes, anything like that is going to be greatly, see a great impact from that. Okay. And we've talked about this, so this is just giving us a small list of just a few tools. Some of the more general kind of buckets of tools that folks use to access the media and navigate the web with screen readers, screen magnifiers, braille readers. There's 3 images on screen right now. Two on top are folks who are using Braille terminals attached to their keyboards in order to access using either screen readers or in order to actually read what is projected on screen. Closed and open captions with digital media. So the picture below here is an example of that on a YouTube video of captions that are used there. Audio description, which is amazing. And I do have linked a really, really cool article thinking about the art of audio description and how it can be used in cinema to be able to create really lush, beautiful experiences for folks who are accessing cinema just orally as a way of storytelling and thinking of it that way. But audio description is included within visual media, usually like film and television, in order to provide a description of what is actually happening on screen to be listened to alongside dialogue and things like that. Transcription, so being able to read actual transcribed dialogue from oral or audio-visual medias. And keyboard navigation related to screen readers, but just the fact that there are many people who don't use mice in order to navigate the web. So just being able to get where you need to go on a web page just purely with keyboard navigation is another thing that is essential as a thinking about, is your website accessible? Can a user access everything without a mouse? Okay. And so this first section is going to be social media accessibility. Again, we're going to be talking about alt text and image description, and we're going to practice writing it and thinking about how to incorporate it in Instagram specifically. But so social media sites like Instagram and Twitter, and there's most every social media site now has a few accessibility features built in, which are alt text and image description. Alt text is not specific to social media. All web frameworks and websites also have alt text. It's literally how screen readers can basically, it's what they read aloud when they reach an image. It's baked into the HTML of a website, or in this case, right, the HTML of an Instagram post or a Twitter post. But social media sites have allowed us to actually access creating our own alt text for our images, which will then implant it where it needs to go on the back end, and then screen readers will read it. Alt text is really important for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest ones is that without alt text, if we don't provide alt text for our images, a screen reader will just read out a default for that image. Usually, if you don't include anything, it will just be the file name of the image, which in a lot of cases is going to be really not great. The other case is if the backend is set up where a blank alt text is just kind of skipped over, then it will just say image and move on. So there is absolutely no context whatsoever of what it is besides the fact that we reached an image and that's it. That's the only information that we're given. So alt text is definitely the most significant thing in terms of like including it with every single instance of an image, if that image is impactful to a user's experience. There are instances in which an image is completely meaningless. Like if you just have a nice little circle that technically is an image on a website, but it's just a graphic, it doesn't actually mean anything. Then you could include just an empty like an empty alt text and it will skip over it, which is actually kind of preferable. But in 90% of circumstances, if you've got an image, you really want somebody to understand what that is and the context of that image in your site or on your social media page. Image description is a little bit more interesting in the case that it's mostly only found on social media sites. Sometimes you might have an opportunity to include a nice like big caption under your image or something on a website, but we don't often see that. However, you know, in social media sites, we've got a caption space that allows us to have a lot more character count to go into a lot more detail about the image and give a lot more information that we might want to give for our social media content. So because both of these things can, and in a lot of times do exist together, we are going to be talking a lot about the relationship between the two of them in social media and thinking about how to write them so that we can avoid a lot of repetition, which can happen when we're thinking about both of these things. Okay, digging into just what is alt text specifically and just some best principles for how to write it. So alt text is really, again, it is located on the back end, and therefore there is a character kind of limit for the most part on the back end, and we do need to be mindful of it being read out every single time that that image is rendered on the page and is navigated. And so really with alt text, the biggest thing is that we want it to be concise, direct, and clear. And in websites, alt text is our kind of just like the way that an image is described. We have a lot more leniency in social media to make our alt text quite concise and then really, you know, expand it in image description space. So yeah, alt text is short. Oftentimes we're trying to have it less than 125 characters, which is about 30 words long. If we're over 30 words, then there needs to kind of be a good reason for it. If it's a very complicated image, then that might be, we might, you know, want to go over that. But for the most part, 30 words is great. Here's an example here with Death Valley National Park Service. National Park Service is great because their social media content has alt text. It has image descriptions for everything. It's a great thing if you're, and it's funny, and we'll look into just it's baked into their social media presence and their entire basically workflow. So those are great sites to kind of look at for examples and how these two things are working together. But the alt text is twisted wood branches in the foreground with an arc of stars in the sky above a dark, distant mountain. Just quite beautiful way, you know, kind of poetic and sweet way to describe this image. But yeah, so in terms of alt text, it's short, as you can see, it's just one sentence. It covers the elements, but does so in a really concise way. Editing alt text is quite easy on Instagram. You can do it at any point of the process. You can write alt text as you are posting. If you go to on your, when you're creating a new post to the advanced settings, there will be an accessibility part where you can click on write alt text, and that's where you will be able to include and write alt text when you're posting. If you've already posted, it's totally cool. You're able to edit the alt text after posting as well by accessing the settings. So those three dots that are above a post. If you go there and then go to edit, down here where you usually get a like tag people, there's also an edit alt text that pops up in that space. I know that the contrast is a little rough in this picture, but it's on the right-hand side on the bottom. If you click that, then it will also bring you to this alt text section where you'll be able to write the alt text for it. Instagram is a little bit annoying. I went through my one of my mutual aid organizations. I went through all of their social media to write alt text and stuff as part of one of the things that I did with that organization. And Instagram can be really touchy about it, and think that when you're editing a ton of captions at once, it can kind of go into security mode and be like, we're kicking you out for a little bit because it seems like you're messing with a lot of posts and da da da. And so there's a little bit of weirdness with that I found just in my like user journey of adding alt text in en masse after posting. But it's something that as an organization, right, like we can do slowly, and if we want to, like be incorporating alt text into our posts if they aren't already included. But just a note that you might find some of that kind of annoyingness, and that is Instagram being annoying, as we would kind of expect, unfortunately, but that's just something to look out for. But yeah, it's pretty easy to get into these posts and change the alt text at any point. Okay. So let's practice on this cute, fun image to start. And we're going to be practicing, again, this is alt text. So the cool thing about alt text and image descriptions in general is that it's creative. You always, as somebody who's writing alt text, have a lot of choices, and that's kind of overwhelming and also can be kind of fun. But the biggest thing to think about always is context. Your alt text is going to be vastly different depending on where the image in question is located and what purpose it serves in the larger context of the site, of the social media, of the post, etc. For this, though, we will think about context moving forward. But right now, for this very first thing that this very first alt text that we're going to write, this very first image we're going to be working with, I want you to just kind of look at this image and think from the perspective of like, how would I describe what is happening here? What parts of the image is my eye drawn to? What elements of the narrative that my mind creates when I look at this photo do I want to share? What emotions are coming up for me? Like, what's the tone of this image that I want to draw attention to, maybe? So those things first, as we're kind of just looking at this for the first time. But we'll take a minute and jot down some elements, some notes, maybe even jot down an actual alt text statement that you want to share, and then we will reconvene.
Really, I feel like every time I want to write alt text, I get just like way too in the weeds. And
yeah, it's a common experience. There's so many things that you want to convey, right? It's like, oh, and then this detail, and oh, this is also happening. And I think that's where it's really nice that we have image descriptions in social media, where there is an opportunity to be as long and narrative as you want to be in that space, which is really great. And then alt text is just when you're writing alt text, it's great. Like, write down everything that you see and everything you want to convey. And then you can kind of be like, all right, now what fits together in the way that's going to be comprehensive and clear, but concise. So it's good to work with a lot. That's a good direction to be in, is going from big to small. That's great. Does anybody want to be really brave and share what they have? Or even any elements that you're like, oh, I noticed this, and this is a great element to include here. Snippets, segments, doesn't have to be completely complete.
I feel like I got through the more broad the more actual granular fuller picture, and haven't got to whittling and zooming out, as it were. So I would offer someone else. going. Or I could share what might work as an image description, but is like not
Amazing.
gonna work for alt text.
Amazing. Do either of you have alt text that you would like? Oh, Paula has shared something in the chat, so I'll read that aloud. We have alt text, small black and white dog at the steering wheel of a car with keys in the ignition in broad daylight. Beautiful, right? And so you're exactly right. We're connecting the subject, the small black and white dog that is nice front and center of the image. So that is a super key, significant thing that we want to include. It's the thing we want to include first, right? It is our subject at the steering wheel of a car. So now we're inside of a car and the dog is in the driver's seat. And there are keys in the ignition, which is a sweet detail, right? That adds to the vibe of the scene. And it's also in broad daylight. Those are awesome, right? Any feedback or any thoughts on it, or anything that you want to add that you noticed or think could be incorporated?
I would try to add the type of dog if I knew what it was, but I don't know what.
Shih Tzu.
Shih Tzu?
Yeah.
Oh.
A small black and white Shih Tzu
With a bob.
with a bob. Yeah. I thought about that too. So the context of this image, there's this right now a very fun, also, if any of you are on LinkedIn, I am, unfortunately, that is my social media of choice right now because I'm looking for a job, but there's an organization, or it's a tech company in Canada called Fable that is a big accessibility tech company, but they're running everyone's running the December days of blank. So they're doing a week and a half long of like alt text like caption contest thing. So they're posting a pets of Fable like image every day, and then folks are presenting what they would write as the alt text. Anyways, this was yesterday's, which was really sweet. But when I looked at it, I was like, ooh, should I include the fact that this dog has a very great recent haircut as a detail? A beautiful bob, a nice haircut, Shih Tzu. Awesome. Yeah, so that would be good, right? If you have details like that and you're not making assumptions, which we'll talk about later, but like if you know, right, this is a Shih Tzu, we can include that as context that will give a lot of information quite quickly to your user, which is great. Any other things that you wrote in your alt text, or any alt text that you would like to share with this one? Amazing, Trish. Okay. A small dog stands on their hind legs on the driver's seat while one front paw rests gently on the steering wheel. The keys are in the ignition. Amazing. Wow, we are already doing so well with writing alt text. This is great, right? So a small dog, right? We have that they are standing on their hind legs on the driver's seat with a paw on the steering wheel. That gives us a lot of information about like what the just the position of the dog in the scene, and like they're not only in the driver's seat, but they're like actively touching the steering wheel, right? Hand on the steering wheel, hand on the horn. Like that is an interesting and key detail here. Keys are in the ignition, right? It seems that both of you have zeroed in on that detail, which is great to notice, right? Like, ooh, yeah, that seems like a key detail that my eye is really drawn to. So I want to include it in the scene.
I feel like a cool game maybe could be, those people who draw like witness statements?
Yes.
So using alt text to see what comes from that alt text, and like a game of telephone, but through image and text.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that reminds me of like a parlor game.
Oh, is it the one where it's like where you like there's a
Yes.
you get an image and then you write the description and then you fold it and the next person has the description, has to do an image and you fold it and it's like, yeah. I played that recently actually.
Love
It's
it.
funny. Yeah, that's awesome. Amazing. Okay. We will see this dog again and we can think more about him as well. But this is right. And I think what with this very first one, the things to think about and get in practice is just being very present with what is happening in the scene and really noticing like where your eye is drawn when you're presented with a scene for the first time, and like what is the context, like what kind of narrative or what kind of context do you want your user to understand about the scene. And that just is a lot of writing alt text, a lot of practice, and also just it's going to be different each and every time. And again, this was a very just like there is no context, but think about how this would change significantly if this was for an image on a website for Lyft, right? Like it's going to be a very different alt text because the context is very different of how this image works within a social media post from Lyft, right? Like there's going to be a lot of maybe some jokes happening. There's going to be a who knows? Like there's going to be a lot of there are things that we need to think about when we're actually putting this image somewhere in relationship. Okay, great. So image description, which, again, it's very much like alt text, but we just have more space this time, which is great because then Phoebe, you're going to be awesome, right? Like then you just get to include all the details that you want, the richness of the image, you have the space to describe it. And the biggest thing with image description to think about is mostly in social media specifically that screen readers are going to be reading it with the alt text and the caption. So all three of these things, that's a lot of text in terms of an image on social media. And what we just need to be mindful of when we're writing both alt text and a caption and image description is that there isn't a ton of overlap for those folks who are using screen readers to just be bombarded with the same kind of information just said in different ways. And so there is some definitely some kind of work, some pre-production thought to go into how do I want to compose these three elements together so that my user is getting all of the information that they need without it being repeated or rephrased in 4 different ways, and et cetera, et cetera. But again, there's just so much opportunity in image descriptions because of the amount of space that we have. And so it gives us, the opportunity to expand, to integrate context into our images and their descriptions, to be more descriptive and colorful, to really, follow our eye across an entire image and just describe all of the things that we see that are important to the image and for folks to be able to get that full picture. Another thing image description is really key and necessary for, we can think especially on social media with how many flyers and maybe even infographics, anything that we have that is text in image form, that text is not going to be read by a screen reader at all. It's not accessible. And so image description is where on social media we transcribe the text that is found in our images if our images have actual written text on them. For the most part, when there's like flyers and things, I would say, if in the caption you are also putting date, time, here's the thing, like basically saying what was said in the text of the flyer in a caption, then that serves a purpose. We don't need to then go in the image description and then also annotate all of the text or transcribe the text, because again, repetition becomes a thing. But it is really important that if an image on social media has text in it, that somewhere in the caption or the image description, every single piece of text is addressed and stated so that it can be accessed by people who are using screen readers or other ways of accessing the image. And this is the same, it's the case with web accessibility as well. We see this a lot where actually on websites, folks are using images like text because maybe they're using a fancy font that isn't available or something, or they have like a cool design that they're doing. And so they'll include text as an image on a website. Any instance of that, you don't have access to the text. So that becomes an accessibility concern there too. But that's on the web accessibility side. Okay. So again, I have another example of the National Park Services. This is a really nice example again of like using image description and captions kind of together to support one another in a way where we're not repeating information per se, but it is just giving us a little bit more, like adding in the image's like quality and its context and purpose into the caption. So, you know, their images and their social media presence tends to be really comedy, like it's funny, it's trying to be really kind of cheeky and like using animals in really sweet and fun ways. And so their image description often keeps with that tone of the image itself. So is able to reproduce the feeling that we get when we look at the image and the context and the joke associated with the image. They communicate the joke so that users can access that aha moment, right? That kind of context without being able to see the image. Usually that's the other thing too, right? If an image is serving the focus of like a joke, oftentimes users lose out on what that joke is because that context isn't communicated. You know, it can be an image of a ferret standing on its legs, right? And that is what the image is, but it also doesn't give us the fun, like we don't get the joke when that is the description, right? And so, you know, we can be thinking about that too in terms of the context of what the image, what purpose it serves. Aw, cat. Interested in image description. I love it. Okay. So context is, of course, like really the name of the game with alt text and image description. And it is really important. And this is a much larger discussion that we can be really sink into and think about, but is really a huge discussion within the accessibility community in general of like how to address human subjects in alt text and in image description, and especially identity categories. The biggest complication here is that the like standard for best practices in alt text and image description is to be as general as humanly possible in your alt text and image descriptions. And this is, you know, best practice in certain circumstances. We definitely do not want to project identity onto folks that we do not know their identity, right? In these cases, it is definitely best practice to use terms that are more general, like adult, child, teen, elder, rather than addressing like an age category, using they or individual as a general, especially when we don't know the person in the photo or their, you know, public persona or context or anything like that. And then it is also seen as best practice to leave race and identity out of the picture altogether. There is a necessarily nuanced conversation that needs to happen around this in accessibility work because, you know, erasure of leaving out race altogether promotes what is the dominant, right? What is the dominant identity? And, you know, I can share lots of articles, and we can also think about this more specifically of folks who have argued on both sides of what does it do to completely leave identity and race out of alt text for folks who only access images through alt text. What does just defaulting to nothing do in terms of representation? And for the most part, some of those conversations have definitely revolved around context and how significant context is. And so in an example here, right, if we were writing alt text for this image of the Little Rock Nine and this very iconic image photograph, with obeying kind of best practices of general, right, we would have a very without reference specifically to race here, right? We would have a woman walks ahead of a crowd and a woman behind her screams in her direction. With reference, we have much more contextual significance and also representation when we have that context by saying, you know, Elizabeth Eckford, a Black woman and one of the Little Rock Nine, walking ahead of a white crowd with a white woman screaming behind her. So the context becomes a lot more, well, it's giving a lot more representation to what the actual image, what its function and what its context is historically. And that is creating a much richer scene for folks who cannot see this image to understand what is the significance of this image, what purpose does it serve within the context of this site. And Paula, yeah, can we say individuals, person, people of color to bring in race? Right. And I think, I mean, this is definitely a conversation like to think about in terms of in the wider conversation, right? There's so, right. What are those kinds of ways that we can bring in race in a way that is also not making large assumptions for folks that we are writing alt text about? And as an organization, these are things that organizations can also make decisions together on what feels good for them in terms of how they want to represent their content to users who are viewing their websites or their social media pages, et cetera. And so, yeah, that's something that I'm bringing here that we can have a more nuanced conversation or a longer conversation about in terms of moving forward with how we want to use alt text, image description, any of these types of tools in our work as queer choir. And yeah, any, I know this is a really, you know, a deep conversation in terms of there's so much to say here, but does anybody have any thoughts or reflection or anything they want to add to my very basic presentation of some conversations that have been had within the scene at large? Yeah.
Like I was just thinking about images of like, queer choir singing and alt text for that. Like I wonder if it'd be important or necessary or relevant. And I know you said it would be more generally could be a bigger group discussion of like, would it be reasonable to say a group of diverse queers are on a stage or would that already be implied because yeah, that is queer choir, or like a group of diverse people of color stand on a stage. I don't know, like I know that it is context driven, especially when it comes to race. Is it meant to be highlighting, could it be also a means of highlighting values that a group holds, or what we're trying to like push forward? I don't know, just things. That's what I thought of when I read Paula's comment.
Yeah. And I mean, I think yes, like I think that it is very much about like what experience do you want a user to have when they are on your website and when they are navigating and, you know, coming up against an image of queer choir members, right? Like, what do you want them to know in terms of inclusion, in terms of what identities like belong, like any of that kind of stuff is, you know, if you default and just like, nah, then, you know, there's a conversation to have of like, okay, then what is somebody going to think if that's not implied? But it is also, yeah, you know, there's a lot of there's complication and nuance there in terms of if you were, for instance, to be writing these kinds of alt text for organizations that you're not, like for other images, right, where you don't have that context, you don't have that that ability to make those types of choices, then yeah, it becomes more of a complicated issue. But still, yeah, I think it's just something to think about, like, how do we want our users to what information do we want to give our users about our membership and about the community that we have.
This is a thought I'm having, but last season when Rachel took our like portraits basically with their phone, they asked each members to write their own bio. And like include like social media, and so they included what we wrote, but maybe we also ask each member who's being photographed to provide an alt text as well, or is that for themselves to be presented, or is that better to just have one person like assigning alt text for that person? I don't know.
Yeah, I think because, I mean, we have the ability to, actually get consent from each person and include them within the process. I think that would be sweet if people want that to be the case. I can say, so in the website, the pages where there are portraits, right? We can look, but my approach for that was, I sided with a more general thing in terms of, I think the way that they are currently is that like a queer choir member with long brown hair wearing a like green hair with a beanie and wearing like sits facing the camera in a garden, right? Like something like that, which is a very general way to go about it, right? And what as you said, like it might be nice if we're able to incorporate, bring people into the process and be like, what would you like want to highlight about this image, or how would you want users to view this image if they want to? I don't know. Does anybody else have any thoughts or ideas around that? Or Phoebe, sorry.
No worries. I think that makes a ton of sense, and I think that I agree with what you've shared, and that would be a lovely practice to ask folks to provide in addition to a description, or what will effectively be the image description. What do you want to share for the alt text? And we could keep a style guide for how we refer to the group. I think that it's really important to many of us in the group to talk about, communicate a political message in our images, and like the difference between a group of masked individuals are singing and a group of queer and trans folks across different racial and ethnic backgrounds, body size, mobility, like wearing N95s is a different political message for someone to hear if they're not able to take that in through the context of if someone just stumbled across an image on social media and they weren't couched in like the context of our website or something like that.
No, those are amazing points to bring forward. And I think exactly, we have that's the thing, is we have the opportunity to incorporate alt text into our political and like our community messaging. And so having a style guide for that, or collaborating, creating like what kind of language do we want to use site-wide, not only just in our actual blocked content on the website, but when we're in our social media, right, like alt text in our image descriptions, how do we want to describe our group, and what kind of language do we want to highlight when it's available to us to be able to highlight that? Awesome. Awesome. Appreciate that. So yeah, this is, we have opportunities, and especially in the work that we do, where we are really close to the folks that we are photographing, and we are the community that we are producing alt text for, and stuff that gives us a lot more opportunities that best practices does not does not lean to that side. Okay. So here's a cool opportunity for us, right? Here is an example of a very recent social media post, one of a few images in a carousel post for queer choir. And so, yeah, just thinking a little bit about a strategy for writing alt text and image description for an image like this, knowing that we have both to include. Let's think about what would we include in a concise and short version in the alt text version, and what are some details that you might want to include in a image description that is elaborating on that alt text. So we'll take a few minutes to think about that. So what are some of the core elements that you're thinking about in terms of alt text versus image description? What do you think is like, this needs to be, how are we going to kind of describe an alt text, concise, short, just to the point kind of description of what is happening in this image? Who, when, where, what, says Paula. Yep. Breaking it down to essentials, knowing that we have a lot more space in our image description to really dig into the context, the vibe, the textures, the colors, the comedy, like any of those kinds of elements. Anyone want to take a crack at alt text, just any description? Yes, when is an easy one to forget. Is it night? Is it day? Is it raining? Is it sunny? Is
I
it
can
winter?
try and modify my stab at the alt text to include a when. A group of 12 or more queer and trans folks of diverse race and ethnicity and body size sit in a park for a vocal workshop on a gray day.
Amazing. Wow. That's great, Phoebe. Right, because that's perfect, right? Like it covers all of the, right, who, when, where, what. It's concise, and you still have so much that you get to dig into in an image description. Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that's a great alt text.
Yay.
Amazing. Does anybody have anything else, or an image description? What are some details that you were noticing in this image that you're like, I'm excited to include this in a bigger, when I have more space? Or how would we, oh, go for it. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I mean, a detail I was trying to encapsulate in alt text was describing the pressing the back of their palms to their cheeks. Was really hard to try to put into alt text, but I just love to like convey, like they are actively engaging in a specific activity that's being facilitated by Rachel. So I don't know. Yeah, that was a detail that I think might actually be best in image description.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, right? Is in image description, we're able to, instead of this is a group of individuals gathered in this space. It can be like, Rachel is leading a workshop on this, something straw phonation. They are currently, like, the group is currently engaged in whatever this exercise was. I'm sorry, Rachel, if you're watching this. I remember what this was, and I also don't remember what it's called. And, you know, like, you can get into actually a lot of that context, and it is nice because, again, we can just ask Rachel, right? What is it? Let's describe it. And yeah, include that as well. Paula says, because also the image description will cover the whole carousel, right? Yes. So that is a point. When we're doing image description, we are also, in the case of this image, right, there was like 4 different images. You would break it down with like, image 1, give a description, image 2, give a description, image 3. So each image, and also if you have a video, then you're going to describe what happens in the video. It can get pretty, you know, there's some space that gets taken up if you're properly, you know, if you're doing image description fully. But yeah, each image is going to have its own little block of text in the larger image description section of your captions. Awesome. How are we feeling about alt text and image description, their relationship, things like that? Good.
Much more confident. Yes.
Sweet. And yeah, so many opportunities to practice. I suggest, just when you're on social media, or even you post your own image, just looking at it and being like, how would I write image description for this? Or, you know, just, yeah, practicing kind of when you're observing and when you're looking at images, just really work your mind in that way.
I've also seen accounts, especially in particularly disability justice accounts, where they have someone has posted and put out an ask to the community of like, does someone have capacity to write image descriptions for this? Like, I've done alt text, I'm out of spoons, but still wanted to post. Can someone fill this in? And I think that's a cool model.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's super collaborative, right? And that's kind of the point too, is that the more comfortable we all get with alt text and image description, we can collaboratively write these things for ourselves in our social media work, and everyone will be able to contribute and feel nice and empowered to do that whenever they want to. So that's what's good. Yeah, so let's take a brief break. I'm telling you, this is my issue with these workshops. I go so long because I'm like, we have so many things to write and think about. And sweet. All right, welcome back. Okay. So with video and media accessibility, again, a lot of this is going to be quite similar to alt text, image description, and things like that. Those are also going to be quite relevant. And similarly, right, the things in video and media accessibility are also present in social media, Twitter and Instagram, and anywhere where video and media is present. So some big like core kinds of tools that we need to think about in terms of audiovisual accessibility are the very intimately connected captions and transcription. Transcription is often the first thing you do, and then you use those transcriptions to create captions. So oftentimes we're thinking about both of them simultaneously. Again, like captions being transcriptions of dialogue and any kind of descriptive text that we burn into video material, and then give the option of presenting on the screen for users when they are viewing a film or TV series or whatever. A transcription is a little bit more general, and it's a written document and a script. So you can either use it to make captions, or it can be a standalone, just written document or script for the dialogue that people can access just on their own, separate from the video file itself. Paula is asking in the chat, what is the difference between open and closed captions? So closed captions are oftentimes burnt into the material itself. So open captions have a little bit more flexibility around like choosing when it is available, etc. Closed captions, yeah, the method is that they are actually burned into the video, so it's a separate track, like a separate video altogether, one of which is just burned in and one doesn't have captions at all. And then audio description again is very cool. Like I'm really into audio description, and it's like amazing kind of opportunities in terms of just producing a really rich experience for users. And there's actually an article written very recently, All the Light We Cannot See on Netflix. They have produced a lot of audio description content for that show, not only every episode, but also a documentary kind of before the show, introducing the costuming, the like audio descriptions of the characters, how they move, all of this stuff to be able to give really rich descriptions of the settings and everything leading into experiencing the show. And it's so there are things that are happening in the audio description world. But to give you, I think I can access this example.
Hundreds of animals gather at the bottom of Pride Rock, a tall, flat ledge that towers over the rest of the savannah. Zazu, a small blue bird with a large beak, flaps to the ledge. He bows to Mufasa, a powerful, dignified lion with a thick red mane.
It's a very small example of this, but this is what we're talking about when we think of audio description. There's a lot of opportunity here and a lot of like thinking about, ooh, what do we include? How do we want to, how do we want to describe what's happening on screen for our viewers? And there's a lot, again, of really creative kind of opportunities here, I think, in an audio description. And the hard thing is that audio description is not standardized. It's something that is incredibly valuable, but not at all where it should be in terms of access for media content. So I want to present it, even though it's not as you won't see it as often. It's not as popularly seen, but it is an amazing resource that I hope, is really, really even more developed. Sounded like the singer from the OG Circle of Life. Heck yeah. Consistency, truly. Right. And sometimes you'll have actors actually doing the audio description so that there is continuity with the dialogue, which is nice. Yeah. All right. So transcription, to be really, we can definitely, you can find a lot of resources on transcription. It is a very well-developed style guide for this. Trish says, is audio description developed alongside filmmaking, or is it also done in post? It is often done in post, and sometimes, I would say most of the time until recently, the production team didn't have any kind of connection with the audio description that was being done. It's like a separate production house that was hired on as a contract to produce audio descriptions for works. Again, what I read about All the Light We Cannot See is that this was like a shift in that the production team actually created all of the audio description for the film. And so it was really a collaboration where they had a lot more control of what it was like what was actually described in the audio description. So, but yeah. The biggest thing with transcriptions is that we want them to be as close to the text or the audio as humanly possible. It can be really, it's easy for us to be like, oh, I'll just clean it up. I'll clean up the text, the likes, the ums, all of that. Like, let's just delete it. Let's make it nice and look, clean and cohesive. And that is not how we do transcriptions. So something to kind of reel yourself in from is like, do not clean up transcriptions, make it as close to the actual text as humanly possible. Sometimes obviously we don't hear everything and it's a little bit difficult, but that is our main goal, is to be as close to the source as possible. There are some style things around like how to denote who a speaker is. We see those two kind of brackets, and then I took out the speaker's name because it's humans, but we'll include a speaker and then colon and then what they say. So that's the general formatting that we usually use. To include sounds, so don't forget to include things like laughter or music, yelling, a way that someone might be speaking beyond a general kind of tone. We want to be able to communicate that to our audience, so we want to include that in brackets. And then when we're done, and we can create these transcriptions in Google Docs, in Word, anywhere, right? But what we're doing is we're going to be exporting it in this format as either an SRT file. That's what we're going to use, or that's what we're going to import into captioning softwares, or into YouTube, which is probably what we're going to be using for captioning because it's very good. Or we can also export as a PDF, unfortunately, but a PDF for download or for other uses outside of, sorry, my neighbors are, I don't know if you can hear them wheeling our trash out. Or, we can also choose if we wanted to just keep it as a Google Doc, share it through like kind of Google Drive situation, so that we're not having to deal with PDFs again, which are a little bit less accessible than Google Doc. But yeah, any questions about transcripts or transcription? It's more straightforward, but good to know just some of the key style guidance here. So captioning, the captioning that we did at Berkeley in the library is we actually used YouTube. So YouTube actually has a quite accessible captioning workflow that will allow you to either import an SRT file into this caption section of which is down here in translations and transcriptions, of your video file or your video creator studio portal. Or it also has the ability to auto create captions that you can then go in and like fix up a little bit. So you notice like sometimes when it auto creates captions in YouTube and it is not all correct, there is actually an ability to then go into this tool here and edit. So you can clean those up yourself and use the auto generated captions as a kind of guide or a starting point if you're working without a transcription. What YouTube also allows you to do is pretty easily time your transcription and your captions, edit how much is seen on screen at any one time. These are nice little blocks of like, this is on screen and then this goes on screen and then this goes on screen. So you can actually control how much content is on screen at any one time. And yeah, so there are a few kind of like guide videos and also like training of how to actually do this in captioning. I would love to work through it in more detail with us sometime too, like actual walking through of like, this is how you make captions. That would be awesome. But knowing that this is kind of a really nice workflow that is available, that is quite quick, especially if you have transcriptions that are clean to begin with, then it's just about timing, which is, yeah, pretty easy. The big thing with captioning best practices, there are a few in terms of very easy, right? Accurate, which transcriptions will give you that accuracy. If you had control over the transcription, then you had control over the accuracy. You have control over the clarity. And for the most part, you have control over the consistency because you, again, created those captions. The biggest thing with timing and captioning is around the readability. These are things that we need to think about. One is the synchronization. So in terms of timing, making sure that when a speaker is speaking, that text is on the screen, so it's lining up correctly. Another one is in terms of how much content is on the screen at any given time. We want at most 2 lines of text on screen, and that is the most text that should ever be on screen. And that block should be on screen for anywhere from 3 to 7 seconds, but never under 3 seconds. And so that becomes most of the work of captioning in terms of the workflow, is making sure that the time you're kind of navigating the timing versus how much text is being shown in a certain amount of time. But yeah, so those are the main considerations with captioning that we think about. Any questions about that? No? Cool. All right. And so we can be thinking about how to incorporate transcription and captioning in our media. It becomes a little bit interesting because we're producing a lot of like singing. It's just singing videos, right? And so how might we, do we want to include lyrics? Do we want to include the kind, like the way that we're singing certain things, like loudly, this part, like gets louder and then softens, and this part, right? Like, how do we want to incorporate the actual the flow of song in captions? Could be something really interesting that we could, yeah, think about and talk about and collaborate as a group of how we might want to translate singing into captions, especially in the videos, yeah, on YouTube that we currently have, which are just performance videos. But thinking in the future, right, if we're making any kind of media interviews or profiles or portrait, any kind of stuff like that, thinking about creating transcriptions and captions for that media to be able to share is going to be a good exercise for us to do as well. Any thoughts there or anything we want to share in this section? Awesome. Thanks, all. So for web accessibility, in this PowerPoint, I have a lot of information. And that's great because we'll share it. We'll share it and it's great and we can read it and look into those resources. But what I want to do with the time is I want to walk through our website so that we can have that recorded and just have people be able to access that. Just some very kind of, these are the basic web accessibility principles. And then throughout the rest of this PowerPoint is digging into each of these so we can read about them. But it's basically poor. So making sure that all content on screen is perceivable, operable. We can actually use it in the way that it's meant to be used and access it. It's understandable and it's robust. Robust is the kind of a little outlier in terms of like, what does that mean in terms of a principle? But mainly robust is having to do with the actual, the engineering side of things. It's related to the fact that it needs to work now in the future with the tools that exist, and it needs to be future forward thinking and almost future proof and thinking about it working robustly when, you know, as new things pop up or in new iterations of things. But perceivable, operable, and understandable are really core ones in terms of UI or user interface, thinking about the actual elements of the front end of the website and how we as a user navigate them, move, perceive, operate, etc., understand. And so this is, I'm going to stop share real quick because then I am going to switch over to, well, I guess I could switch. There we go, queer choir. over to Queer Choir. So let's see, sharing a little bit of what Paula and I were working on with Queer Choir, some things that we changed a little bit in terms of navigation. One of the things is that previously the website that we had a lot of these like when you would hover on here, there would be drop down menus. And the complicated thing with that is that, as we'll see, I'm going to activate our screen reader and also turn up my sound so you can hear what happens when the screen reader moves through the page. This is again on the home page, but it will reactivate each time if I change anything. But here.
Select language. Language translate widget. Menu pop-up collapse button. Select language. Menu item. Powered by. Link. Facebook. Link. Instagram. Link. YouTube. Search edit text. Blank. Image. List 5 items. Visited link. Home. Visited link. About. Visited link. Listen. Visited link. Contact us. Link. Donate. Heading level 2. The Queer Choir. Creating an inclusive and accessible environment for queer and trans singers. Link. Donate now. Heading level 2. Celebrating queer and trans joy through our voices.
So the
Queer
biggest
Choir,
thing when
QC,
we're
is an
going
ensemble
through
of queer and
this
trans singers from
first
diverse
initial
backgrounds, musical experiences,
move
and
with
voice
a
types.
screen
We
reader,
hold
and when
weekly
you're doing an
rehearsals in the East
accessibility
Bay,
audit of the
CA, and
site,
perform
is
2-3
making sure
times
that
per
it's
season.
touching
We
every
create an
element of the
inclusive and
page as
accessible
it's going through
environment
in
for
this
queer and
mode.
trans singers to come
This is
together and
read
build
mode,
community.
which is
Group.
going through
Heading level
everything.
2. We create an inclusive and accessible environment for queer and trans singers to come together and build community. Link. Donate now. Stay in the loop. Star indicates required email address. Star first name last name. Subscribe Intuit MailChimp. Group. Heading level 2. Stay in the loop. Star indicates required. Email address star. Email address star. Email address star. Required edit text email. First name.
Okay.
Email address star. Email
So
address star. Edit
you're
text
getting the
email.
idea.
Required invalid data.
In terms
You are
of
currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type.
fields like a form field, there's a lot of stuff, right? Like it stopped. I didn't actually do anything to enter into form fields. But so in read mode, it will go through each aspect of the page. It will allow you to pause at any point and tab out of this workflow and into a different workflow. There are a lot of different shortcuts and ways that you can navigate the page with your screen reader and with your keyboard, that you can either navigate just from link to link to link, and then clicking on links and things like that. You can just access an element or all of the H1s, which are all the headings, and go by heading, by heading, by heading, so that you can skip and see what all the main parts of the page are, and then stop when you're at the part that you want to move through or navigate to or click into or anything like that. So the big thing is that there's just a lot of different ways that people are going to be navigating your website with a screen reader. And you want to make sure that if they're choosing any of those ways, that in terms of things being clear and navigable, that is easeful for them. One of these things that's very easy for us in terms of edits to make, and something that I only had to make like 1 or 2 changes, but something to keep in mind is in terms of people navigating just by links. It's pretty, we have a kind of standard practice, right? To do like click here, you know, or only to highlight like here, or I don't know, click here is the easiest one, right? To like think about, but things like that, are actually quite difficult. So if you can imagine just navigating from link to link, and it's just like click here, here, click here, here, you don't have the context of like where's this link going? Click here to where, right? And so thinking of making your buttons and your links super clear of like where they're going is a way of greatly increasing accessibility of those types of fields. And so, right, like our donate now and support us are well marked so that we know where that's going. So in terms of this top element with the drop down, what was happening is in the screen reader, it wasn't allowing our users to access any of the subheadings underneath these headings on the navigation. So what Paula did awesomely, right, is allow for not this drop down menu, but
Visited,
instead to
about,
have
link,
all of
Facebook, link,
the information that
Instagram,
would have been in the
link,
drop down
YouTube,
just
image,
on a single
visited link
page
image,
element.
the queer choir,
And that's
list
a
5
great
items,
way
visited
to
link, home,
increase the
visited link,
accessibility and make
about,
things a lot more
visited link,
easy to navigate
listen,
here.
visited link, contact us, link,
So I'm
image,
now
link,
tabbing.
image, link, image. A
See,
queer choir member with shoulder-length bright purple hair and wearing a gray studded denim jacket smiles at the camera.
there's
Paula,
the alt text.
she/her, soprano. You are currently on a link inside of web content. To click this link, press Control Option Space. To exit this
Option space, right? And that opens up the link. And yeah, and so we have the
Zoom us,
caption, which
Zoom share toolbar windows,
everyone.
Chrome,
Turning
about,
red.
the queer choir,
John,
voiceover off.
her, to everyone, as you can see.
interesting things happening. Okay. So
Select language, voiceover off.
stuff for right now. Right, so that was, we just saw an example of the alt text being read aloud, which is great. And again, right, we can navigate, or folks are often going to be navigating using the tab, which is an easier way to
link, image. A queer choir member with long brown wavy hair and wearing blue overalls and a navy blue t-shirt laughs at the camera. Rachel,
these are very
she/they,
general, as I said before.
You are currently on a link inside of web content. To click this link, search text field.
Oh, I see what's happening.
SVGs folder. Actions available. SVGs. Voiceover
Because
off.
when I'm clicking on this, I'm going into a different window. Some other things that are really important to think about here is contrast. So making sure that your text is readable, which feels very simple, but often in design, the contrast is less than we actually require to pass the accessibility standards. Some cool tools that we have to like look and assess accessibility of a website. The first of which is in our dev tools. If you right click and go to inspect, it's gonna bring up web tools, which is a console for developers, et cetera, but will also allow you to see alt text. This is like where alt text lives, is in this HTML. And on Chrome, you have access to Lighthouse, which has an accessibility category that you can like do an audit of whatever site you're on and see the accessibility parameters, like where it passes and where it fails. There's also a number of tools, some of which I have included on the PowerPoints to look at. Axe or Wave is the other one that is a plugin that will allow you to see some of these things. So like Axe, for instance, brings up this, and I can scan this page and it will showcase the issues. You can put best practices on and things like that. But it will show you where some of these, like for instance, where a contrast issue might be, or these are very, very internal dev topics here, but things like ARIA labels and landmarks and stuff like that. There's also accessibility checkers like accessibilitychecker.org, where you can just put the URL of a website in and it will give a kind of small report on some of the critical issues for that site. You have a lot of those types of tools at your disposal to just purely kind of look at any website. You can do it with Google or yeah, any site, insert site here. But But yeah, I mean, the main thing when you're navigating with a screen reader and testing a site with a screen reader is super important and reveals a lot of issues very quickly to you. Some of the big things are like focus trapping, where you can't get out of an element, you enter into it, and then you can't tab out of it. You just get into a loop where it just continually goes back to and repeats itself over and over again. Those are pretty easy to see once you use a screen reader that's happening. It can be a little complicated to fix those things, but good to diagnose it. And, you know, it's good with any site that you're making to try to navigate it easily with a screen reader, and just see what that experience is like. Of course, absolutely nothing can replace user testing and putting your site in front of as many diverse users as humanly possible and actually getting their experience. Using any of these test tools, trying to replicate accessibility tool usage is not a replacement for that at all. And yeah, so as much feedback and as many folks that we can get our site in front of and just gauge feedback of their experience in using it, and have that open channel of feedback where we're actually taking folks' feedback into account is going to be incredibly essential. Whatever opportunity we have to get that, to make that happen, is going to be, the main thing. But it is good to be aware of these tools, of ways that we can use technology that artificially tests software to see where holes in accessibility are. It is good for us to be mindful about it, and then also be pushing for actually getting user testing and feedback from humans who have all kinds of very diverse needs in how they're accessing the site. I know that this was like a very brief last section. I do apologize for it, but I want to kind of show you a lot of information. Wow, all of these different things to keep in mind about websites. It feels a little overwhelming. I know when you look at it, it's like, oh my gosh, I've never, thought about this type of interaction, the different options that are needed and available here. But I do, I recommend moving through this kind of description, these WCAG or web accessibility principles, to just see kind of when people are testing and when people are auditing websites, these are the core points that we have to make sure are working, and before we can check it off as being an accessible site. And also noticing, as stated previously, that 98% of sites unfortunately do not obey all of these points, and it's good to kind of think about where are these sites failing, in what areas, and really kind of pushing and working towards those. So, I mean, it's 8:30. I would say just to leave with some reflection questions, again, of thinking about things that we're taking away from just this kind of brief introduction to these very complex and very, wide and deep processes and workflows and ideas and experiences, and thinking about areas that you want to maybe explore and elements that you wish we had more time to talk about, and taking that opportunity to explore them more now that they've been introduced as topics of exploration. I also want, of course, I did this in the beginning, but definitely feel free to reach out to me or each other to continue conversations around this. If you are also doing your own research outside of this and have really cool resources that you want to share with others, we can collaborate in terms of having a space, maybe a Google Doc or something, to keep some of these resources so that folks can access it. and yeah, keep this kind of a collaborative space where we are able to share things that we're learning or things that we're reading or exploring in terms of, yeah, navigating digital spaces. I have some of the, like if you want to explore a website using a screen reader, here's something that you can do. If you want to view alt text, you can use these different things. Keyboard navigation, here's a list of those accessibility checkers that I briefly introduced, and some resources. Again, this is a very cool article on audio description as a pedagogical tool, but it's more about how it's a creative and learning kind of opportunity. But there's a lot of yeah, a lot of resources. Jessamine West is an awesome librarian and accessibility educator who has a very extensive resource list of lots of different digital like accessibility tools and articles and things like that. So I do suggest looking at her yeah, collection of resources. Yeah. Any thoughts you want to leave before we say goodbye? I appreciate, thank you so much, all of you, for collaborating and like, yeah, all of your awesome alt text and image description thoughts, and thinking about, yeah, how we are going to incorporate this into the work that Queer Choir is doing and the media that we're producing and the presence that we have in digital spaces. And all of that is just are definitely conversations to obviously continue and collaborate on in a larger group and bring to the larger group. And yeah, thank you for collaborating on that space tonight.